Hey, amazing teachers! If you've ever found yourself feeling frustrated with the progress of your students or questioning the effectiveness of those old school teaching methods, don't worry, you're in the right place. Right here, right now, and I'm ready to have done this. How? Just like a superhero. That's right, Fizz. Today we're going to break down some of the biggest myths in language teaching that might be holding your students back. And in this part, we're going to show you how to lift those myths and unleash the true potential of your classroom. Now, I bet you're wondering, what are the most common misconceptions that educators have about language learning? Ooh, I know this one. And how does comprehension-based teaching really stack up against the traditional methods everyone talks about? Exactly, Fizz. Well, stick with us because not only we're going to debunk these myths, but we're also going to share some super practical strategies you can start using in your classroom right away. Whether you're looking to add some new light to your teaching or help your students achieve super success, we've got the tips you need. By the end of this video, you'll have a clear understanding of the misconceptions that might be slowing your students down and the tools to transform your teaching with ease. Let's dive in, teachers. It's time to unleash that classroom magic. All right, let's get started. You know, when it comes to language teaching, we've all heard the same old advice. Hammer those grammar drills and get students speaking the language from day one. Sounds familiar, right? It's like the go-to recipe for language success. Or at least, that's what we've been led to believe. But what if I told you that these so-called tried and true methods might actually be holding your students back? Yep, that's right. These myths, as widely accepted as they are, can create a mountain of frustration both for you as the teacher and for your students. Let's start with the grammar drills. You might think that endless conjugation exercises are the key to fluency. After all, repetition is how we learn, right? But here's the kicker. Focusing too much on grammar drills can actually make the language learning feel like a chore. Imagine trying to build a house by obsessing over the individual bricks without ever stepping back to see the bigger picture. When students are buried in grammar rules, they can lose sight of the real goal, communication. The truth is, understanding grammar in context, rather than through isolated drills, leads to much more natural language acquisition. So those endless worksheets, they might be doing more harm than good. Now let's talk about the idea that students must speak the language from day one. Sounds logical. If they start speaking early, they'll get better faster, right? Well, not exactly. Forcing students to speak before they're ready can actually create anxiety and fear of making mistakes, which can seriously stunt their progress. Think about it. If you were asked to perform a task in a new language without fully understanding it, you'd probably feel pretty overwhelmed, wouldn't you? By giving students the chance to soak in the language first, through listening and comprehension, they build a much stronger foundation. This way, when they do start speaking, it comes from a place of confidence and understanding rather than pressure and fear. So the next time you're planning your lessons, remember it's not about how many grammar drills you can squeeze in or how quickly you can get your students talking. It's about creating a supportive environment where they can truly understand and connect with the language. And when that happens, fluency naturally follows. Let's be honest, traditional language teaching methods can feel a bit like trying to push a boulder uphill. You know the drill. Start with grammar rules, throw in some vocab lists, and then, if there's time, maybe squeeze in some speaking practice. But have you ever noticed how often this approach leaves students feeling stressed out and struggling to put the pieces together? It's almost like we're asking them to build a puzzle without showing them the picture in the box. But what if there was a way to make language learning not just easier, but also more enjoyable for both you and your students? Spoiler alert, there is, and it's called comprehension-based teaching. So what makes comprehension-based teaching such a game changer? Imagine this. Instead of throwing your students into the deep end with grammar drills and forced conversations, you immerse them in the language through stories, real-life scenarios, and context-rich input. They start by understanding before they ever have to produce a single word. It's like letting them watch the movie before asking them to write the script. The beauty here is that comprehension-based teaching focuses on meaningful input. Things like listening to stories, watching videos, or reading texts that are just a bit beyond their current level. This approach allows students to pick up on patterns, vocabulary, and grammar naturally, without the pressure of needing to speak perfectly right off the bat. Now here's where the magic really happens. By focusing on comprehension first, you're not just teaching students to memorize and regurgitate information. You're helping them to truly internalize the language, and that's What does that mean for your classroom? Well, for starters, reduced anxiety. When students aren't constantly worried about making mistakes, they're free to engage more deeply with the material. They start to enjoy the process of learning rather than dreading it. And as they soak up the language through context, they start producing it more naturally. It's like watching a flower bloom, slow at first, but soon enough, it's vibrant and full of life. But that's not all. With comprehension-based teaching, you'll also see a boost in student engagement. When learning feels relevant and connected to real-world contexts, students are more motivated to participate. They're not just going through the motions. They're actively involved in the process, and that's when you start to see real progress. When language learning becomes less about ticking boxes and more about genuine communication. So if you're ready to transform your teaching and see your students thrive, it's time to embrace the power of comprehension-based methods. Trust me, the results will speak for themselves. Hey everyone! Quick announcement before we wrap up. Oh, this is a dig, right? You got it, Fizz. We're excited to announce our Dynamic Discipline course, your go-to guide for mastering classroom management while building real relationships with your students. Imagine having maximum engagement and way less stress in your classroom. If you want to keep your classroom running smoothly and connect with your students at a whole new level, this is the course for you. Absolutely. So if you're ready to transform your teaching experience, head over to mm.us/discipline and join us. We can't wait to see you there. Let's make classroom management a breeze together. All right, so you're sold on the power of comprehension-based teaching. But now you're probably wondering, how do I actually put this into practice in my classroom? Trust me, you're not alone. Shifting from traditional methods to something new can feel a bit daunting. But here's the good news. Making this change doesn't mean you need to overhaul everything you're doing. In fact, with a few simple tweaks, you can start to see a huge impact on your students' engagement and success. Let's kick things off with one of the most powerful tools in your teaching toolkit, storytelling. Think about it. Who doesn't love a good story? When you weave language learning into a narrative, you're not just teaching words and grammar, you're creating a world for your students to explore. Start with stories that are rich in context, but still accessible. Use repetition and relatable characters to help reinforce key vocabulary and structures. And don't be afraid to get animated. Use gestures, facial expressions, and even props to bring the story to life. The more engaging the story, the more your students will be drawn in, making the language stick naturally without feeling forced. Now, imagine your classroom as an immersive environment where language isn't just something to be learned, but something to be lived. How do you create this? It's easier than you might think. Start by surrounding your students with visuals that support the language you're teaching. Think pictures, diagrams, and even short video clips that align with your lesson. These visuals act as cues that help your students make connections between words and their meanings without needing to translate in their heads. Combine this with strategic use of gestures like miming actions or pointing to objects to give students multiple ways to understand what's being communicated. The goal here is to reduce the pressure on the students to immediately produce the language and instead allow them to absorb and process it in low-stress, supportive environment. But how do you tie all this together into something like you can actually use day to day? Well, let's talk about a simple activity that's both effective and easy to adapt to any classroom. The picture story walk. Here's how it works. Choose a series of images that tell a story and present them to your students one by one. As you show each picture, describe what's happening using the target language and encourage your students to guess what might happen next. This not only builds comprehension, but also keeps them engaged as they predict the story's outcome. You can easily adapt this to different levels by adjusting the complexity of the language or the images you use. And the best part, your students are practicing language in a way that feels more like play than work. Now, by integrating these strategies, you're not just teaching language, you're creating an environment where students can actually acquire it, reducing their anxiety and increasing their confidence. So go ahead, give it a try, and watch your classroom come alive with the excitement of true language learning. And there you have it, folks. Now you're all set to start implementing these strategies in your classroom and watch your students thrive. But wait, there is more! If you want to avoid some common pitfalls, be sure to check out our next video on the high mistakes not to make when teaching with comprehension-based methods. You definitely don't want to miss it. Absolutely. And before you go, we'd love to hear from you. What's one myth about language teaching you used to believe? Drop it in the comments below and let's get the conversation going. And as always, happy comprehensible input!